Go ahead and share the screen and we will get going. There we go. Cool. Cool. So tonight is our kind of the last chance, right? To ask questions, to all of that kind of stuff, and which is great. We'll talk about the organization of the way the church works, and then how we move forward as individuals, as a congregation, and as Episcopalians. So that's the overall sort of trajectory of the evening. When I went back through and looked at the book talks about some of this stuff in reverse order about how I'm going to do it. So just so you know that. But before we get started, clearly, as I always want to do, are there any questions that anybody has from all that we've talked about going forward? Some things might wait until the end, but if you've got questions now, what might those be, if anything? Nan, if you're talking, you are muted. I'm just watching a mouth move, so maybe it's eating, which is
no, I had muted because the dog was barking. I do, but not about the text per se, about something else related to the church, but not the text. So I'll say it at the end.
okay. All right. Well, jump in whenever you feel when it fits in. So
I have a question.
sure.
Do you have to go through any kind of confirmation, like a formal confirmation, to be a member of the church?
Good question. Hold that until the end because we'll get there.
Okay.
Short answer is no, but there's a longer answer, of course. There's always a longer answer. Anything else? Okay.
I sort of had a related one about we covered around sort of baptism and like that, which was sort of I think briefly addressed in the readings, but sounds like that's coming up later. So we can wait till the end around how you join the church.
Great.
Basically.
Great. Perfect. Yep. That's again, like I say at the end, it's my last slide. All right. So that's cool. All right. So oops. So we already talked about this question from prior weeks. If you've got anything, just let me know. And I always like to sort of get us back to where we are now by going back to where we were before. And so we've talked about worship and prayer. We've talked about Episcopalians in the Bible. We've talked about history. We've talked about the way we think. So all of those pieces together explain a lot of who Episcopalians or who Anglicans are, how we approach the world, and all of that kind of stuff. And what we're really going to do now is, or this evening, is talk about questions of organization, structure, that kind of stuff, which some people find, well, kind of pedantic, and other people say, oh, now I understand why we do it this way. And why, Deacon Nadine wears things differently than I do, and all of those kinds of things. So we're going to talk about that a little bit tonight. And again, stop me wherever we go. And so I would say, here with this young guy who's looking around the edge of the pew, here's somebody who's looking at how we worship, and he sees all these people wearing these different kinds of things, and somebody's talking and somebody's not talking, and then somebody else is talking. And why are all these people doing these various things with their hands and all of this? So everything stems from worship. We've talked about that from the very beginning, that for Episcopalians, for Anglicans, worship is central. And we've talked about how everybody, every person in the sanctuary has a role in worship, from the folks sitting in the pew, like this young guy, or from the people sitting up front. And their role is different, but sometimes the same. And what is all of that about? And so we're going to start in worship, and then distinctly from the way that the book presented it, we're going to work up or back. Maybe back is a better word, from worship up the chain to the bigger church. We have done that in some respects by talking about history and all these other kinds and trying to bring it down to who we are. But now we're going to go from what we do on Sunday mornings up through the what are called the orders of ministry, up through the diocese and all that kind of stuff, up through the national church. So as I put it here on the slide, who stands where and why? Okay. So if you look in the New Testament, you will find what I would call orders mentioned, these various roles that people who lead worship or who lead a congregation, how they're referred to. And what I would, what this points out here is these are called the biblical orders. And in this picture, I don't know who they are. This is one of those cases where I found the photo that had the right grouping of people. Here we have what we call the biblical orders of bishop, priest, and deacon. And the guy in the middle holding the stick, that's called a crozier. He's a bishop. The two women on his right are priests, and the gentleman on the left is a deacon. And we'll talk about that, sort of more fully. But if you are accustomed to being in Episcopal worship, you get exposed to how these different people are indicated by how they are dressed. And so the bishop in the middle, we'll talk about all of this, has the pointy hat, and he's holding the stick. The pointy hat has to do with, there's history about that. But that shows that he is a bishop. I never wear a pointy hat. You'll never see me a Good Shepherd wearing a pointy hat. And you'll never see me holding a crozier, which is this long staff that if the picture was a little bit better, you would see it turned one direction or another, and you would see a crook on it. And that's to emulate a shepherd's crook. The bishop is the chief shepherd of the diocese, of the flock. To the bishop's right, these people are wearing a stole, that garment that goes around the head and then down in front on both sides. That these two folks are priests, and that's how a priest wears his or her stole. And we'll talk about that a little bit more in a minute. And then the gentleman on the left of the slide is a deacon, and like Deacon Nadine, wears a stole across his or her chest. And so when you look at people up front, you see the three, if you were in a place where a bishop was, you would see these three liturgical orders, what we call orders, which you're ordained into, represented by the different ways that we wear liturgical garments. we'll get into that a little bit more as we go on. But clergy, the one group of ordained ministers that you aren't seeing in the slide are the people that you are seeing if you're looking at the Zoom screen. Everybody else is ordained to ministry by virtue of your baptism. And our catechism makes that clear, that the ministers of the church are the ordained by baptism. And then there are those who are called to different ministry, deacons, priests, and deacons. And again, we'll talk about that in a little bit more. But the bishop organizes, works with all of the congregations, and guides the diocese in its direction. This is all explained in the book a little bit. The priest, that would be me in this case, works with the congregation to teach and to baptize on behalf of the bishop, to preach, to do pastoral care, to run the congregation. And the deacon is the person who sort of connects the church to what's going on out in the world, and then what's going on out in the world to the church. And if you've been around long enough to hear Deacon Nadine preach, she preaches differently than I do. And I am so glad that she does, because she can really connect to the church. She is out there working at St. Clare's. She's doing other kinds of things and talking to these folks. She can bring their stories to the church, and she can bring the stories of the church to her. While, as I said on Sunday, for those of you who were there, it was my job after the service ended to go and see one of our members of the congregation who was sick. It's my job mostly to preach, to teach, and to be pastor to the people in the congregation. And the bishop does all of that to all of the congregations. It's a job. Somebody asked me if I ever wanted to be one, and I said, if you want me to quit being a priest, nominate me over there. This is where I'm going to be. I do not want that job. And God bless those people who feel called to be a bishop. So, sort of an overview of those roles. We'll touch on them a little bit more as we move on. All right, so we can get us to the next. There we go. So all of this comes from stuff, of course, in the New Testament. And if we think about who were the ministers in the Hebrew Bible or in the Old Testament or Jewish worship, you had priests and you had rabbis. And before a certain point in their history, it was all the priests. They were the people who did the temple ritual, who sacrificed the animals, who did all of that kind of sort of liturgical stuff, the worship stuff. And then when Judah went into exile, and they couldn't do that because they needed the temple to do that. They had to figure out another way to worship. And in Babylon, that turned into what we would now know as synagogue worship. And the leaders there were all about teaching and praying, not so much about sacrificing and praying, but teaching and praying. And so that's where we get this differentiation between the priests and the rabbis. Well, Jesus in the New Testament gets referred to all the time by his followers as rabbi, as teacher. So here we get this teaching office of the church, personified in Jesus. The priests were over on the other side. Jesus is doing sort of a teaching side. He didn't say that the priests were not good. He was just saying, I'm doing this side. And then he brought around him, of course, these 12 apostles. And then after he was crucified and the Jerusalem was destroyed by the Romans, there was no temple. The priestly mission of Judaism sort of went away because they didn't have a temple in which to do these. But the teaching ministry, not only of Jesus, but of the rabbis, continued on. And if you go to any synagogue in Denver right now, you'll have rabbis. These are the teachers. They're not sacrificing animals or doing that kind of stuff, of course, but they're teaching people how to follow the law as they've understood it after the temple was destroyed. So Jesus has appointed his followers to go out and to teach on his behalf. And they did that and started to establish groups of Christians. And these groups of Christians had to be shepherded and led as they move forward. And so in Acts, the book of Acts of the Apostles, we read the stories of how this began to happen in Jerusalem, and then as it began to expand further and further throughout the Mediterranean world. And we read in Acts 6 of the appointment of deacons. The apostles were trying to do everything, and there were only 12 of them. They were trying to do everything in terms of preaching and going to the congregation, being the pastors, but also expanding the ministry of the church beyond that, taking care of the people in the congregation. It was an incredibly challenging role, and some people thought that they were being ignored in this, and in particular, the people who were Christian and Jewish, but who weren't, or who were Christian and Jews, but who weren't ethnically Jewish. So these Greek Christians said, we're being ignored. And the apostles said, we're going to appoint people to take care of you. And that was what the deacons were appointed, first deacons were appointed to do, was to take care of kind of the day-to-day ministry of the church while the apostles went out and did the other stuff. And so we've got records of deacons. We've got records of people like Philip the evangelist. You read the book of Acts, you'll hear all of this. Philip the evangelist, who was doing ministry around outside of Jerusalem. We read in the New Testament of people who were really good at explaining how God was at work in the world. We had people who were really good at talking about the history, the teachers. There were people who were really good at sort of exercising a healing ministry. All of these are recognized in the New Testament as being ministries of the church. So we see something that's going from rabbi to leader to evangelist to healer to prophet to teacher. The way that church grew also meant that the way that the leadership had to grow. And so pretty soon, various titles or descriptive words began to be applied to these folks. And so in later on in the book of Acts, we hear about elders or presbyters. That the Greek word is presbyter, being appointed. These are people who were older or wiser in the faith, who could help younger people, or younger, not necessarily age, but in experience, move into what the church was all about. So elders, that word is an English word to translate the Greek word presbyter. Priest, the word priest also derives from the word presbyter. So in some churches now you talk about elders, the Methodist Church, the Presbyterian Church, for example, talk about elders. It's the same role that the Episcopal Church and the Roman Catholic Church and maybe the Orthodox Church talk about using the word priest. In terms of functional roles, these are leaders in a congregation. In other books of the New Testament, Philippians, for example, you'll read the word episkopos or episkopoi, as I put it down there. That's a Greek word for the person who looks over the congregation. Presbyter is a word that leads. Episkopoi is one who looks over. That's the word that we translate into bishop. That's why we are called the Episcopal Church, because we are led by bishops. Overseers is another word. People who look over a larger gathering of folks. So already, and then we talked about deacons. So in later books in the New Testament, Titus and First Timothy referenced there, you have all three of them mentioned in the same place: bishops or episkopos, priests, presbyteros, and deacons, diakonos. All of those will be mentioned in a same place. So the church, over the course of the books, even in the New Testament, began to recognize how it was being organized, run, cared for in all of these different ways. So all of these three, the bishops, priests, and deacons, are referred to in the New Testament. And of course, the underlying assumption is that there are folks who haven't been chosen or who haven't risen to these roles of leadership. So stop there and see if there are any questions. Y'all are muted, and so I'm not seeing any of the mute signs.
Hey, Gary,
Go.
Nadine is the deacon only for Good Shepherd, or does she serve other churches as well?
Great question. Great question. So Nadine, and I'm sorry, I should have had her on here to talk about some of this. Nadine understands her ministerial calling in the church to be a deacon, to represent the church to the world and the world to the church. And her placing in the church is at the direction of the bishop. So tomorrow I could get a letter from the bishop saying, I want Nadine to go to this other church and be there for 3 years. That's we have a 3-year sort of connection. But she is ordained a deacon for the church at the direction of the bishop. All right. And so she came to Good Shepherd 4 years ago because Good Shepherd felt that we needed a deacon, and Nadine was looking for a congregation to be affiliated with. And so between Nadine and me and the bishop, we said, well, let's have her at Good Shepherd for the time. So at the end, she's been there for 3 years, and now she's in her fourth. At some point in the next couple of years, it will kind of inevitably happen that she will go to another congregation. She also travels a little bit on behalf of the bishop. Sometimes she's not there on Sunday mornings because she's with the bishop in another place. So deacons serve at the pleasure of the bishop.
Wow.
She's with us mostly, but she can be going someplace else. I am at the bishop's, with the bishop's permission and direction and Good Shepherd's permission, direction. I'm a Good Shepherd. I'm not going to go someplace on Sundays unless it's a day off or something like that. But where I am located is a Good Shepherd. Nadine is located at Good Shepherd at the pleasure of the bishop. Okay.
The bishops, are they specific to a specific diocese, or can they move from, like as a priest can apply and move to a different diocese?
Were you asked? I missed something. So you say, is that the case with bishops?
Yes, no, can deacons move from one diocese to another?
So, okay, larger question, and we'll probably touch on this a little bit, but that's a little further down, but that's fine. So bishops are chosen by the diocese, elected by a diocese to stay in that diocese. Now, there are circumstances where a bishop will move from one to another diocese, but they're rare, very rare. Now, priests can move from diocese to diocese. In my case, if I was in California, I was ordained a priest in North Carolina. And then I got a job in California, so I moved from from North Carolina to California. And then I answered another call to ministry in Colorado. And so I moved from California to Colorado. So that's kind of a job change in a different way than a bishop could do. With deacons, they can move, it may be because their spouse or family circumstances said, it makes more sense for me to be in Colorado than to be in Georgia. Deacon Nadine was in Atlanta before they moved to Colorado. And then what happens is that you transfer your association from one place to another. So I don't want to say it's complicated, but there's or bureaucratic, but you can't do it sort of willy-nilly, liturgically or professionally. You can't do it willy-nilly. There is a process, and I know, Nan, you were in the class on the on Episcopal one, or not Episcopal 101, on Nicaea, and so you heard a little bit about this. But how do clergy move from one place to another? And this is part of that. So I appreciate the question.
The deacons can't get called then by another congregation, for example.
No. Deacons serve at the pleasure of a bishop, and a bishop will move you, can help you move from one diocese to another and make that happen. Technically, I, as a priest, have to be sort of given permission to move. It's a slightly different thing. But when I was Episcopal campus minister at UC Berkeley, and I accepted the job as the university chaplain at University of Denver, that was a job transfer. And the bishop said, yeah, that's fine with us. It's slightly different with deacons. Not tremendously, but slightly different. A good question.
Gary?
Yeah.
Can deacons conduct a service? In other words, if you're on vacation or sick, can the dean step in and conduct the service, or is that to be a priest?
So there are two answers to that question. And I'll go back to my own history in the Episcopal Church. So I was attending, this is before I was ordained, I was attending a church in Eugene, Oregon. And we had a rector, that would be my role. We had an assistant priest, and we had a deacon. And on one particular Sunday, the priest was on vacation, and the assistant priest got sick and couldn't be there on a Sunday morning. So the deacon came in and led the service, but the deacon had to use elements of the sacrament, so bread and wine that had been blessed by the priest at maybe some previous Sunday. So the deacons cannot consecrate bread and wine in the service. Mm-hmm. And that is not just Episcopalian, that's Catholic, that's everybody. That's not the role of a deacon. But that doesn't mean that they can't use elements that have already been consecrated and then distribute them. So if you look at the front of Good Shepherd from your seat in the congregation, over on your right, there's this little cupboard, and you'll see us go up to that cupboard and take stuff out and put stuff up and take stuff. So that's all stuff up in that cupboard. It's called an aumbry or a tabernacle. All of that stuff up there has already been consecrated, has been blessed, and we keep it up there for use in those kinds of situations when I can't be there, or we may need to take things from that storage to folks who are in the hospital or something like that. But a deacon can lead a service, but cannot consecrate bread and wine in terms of the same way that I, as a priest, can do it. That answer your question? Yeah, it's a really good question.
A follow-up question about the Eucharist
Yeah.
and the wine.
Yeah.
I just familiar with the Catholic service that the priest has to consume the wine or to like it because it's blessed, it's consecrated. Is that the same in the Episcopal Church or?
What a great question. So in the prayer, I've got a cat who is being sort of insistent right now. In the prayer of consecration, you'll hear me say, this is given for all of you. Drink this, all of you, and in the Greek, there's no punctuation. So does it mean drink this, all of you? Or does it mean drink this, all of you? And so traditional Roman Catholic theology has suggested that it means drink this all. So it all has to be consumed. Others just say drink this and then all of you. But if you, regardless of how you do it, what happens when there's wine left over from, serving it to the congregation? If I or the folks in the service don't consume all of the wine, then what do we do with it? And it gets taken care of after the service in the sacristy, which means that either the other servers in the sacristy consume the wine, or we have a special sink into which it is poured, and that when it's poured into that sink, it goes straight down into the dirt. It doesn't go into the sewer. It goes into the dirt, so that it isn't taken as a consecrated wine and then mixed with all of that stuff that goes into the sewer. It goes straight into the dirt. Same thing with the bread. If all of the bread isn't consumed, what happens to that? It doesn't go into the garbage can. One of the Ultra Guild members will take it home and sprinkle it under the bird feeder or something like that, so that it is consumed naturally. It doesn't become garbage. So that's a really, really great question. And my cat has moved to a chair and has curled up. So don't have to deal with the cat. Great question. Anything
It was
else?
really interesting. Yeah, I never knew that.
Yeah. What does it mean to have when you don't have punctuation in the Greek, what does it mean? Take this, all of you, or is it take this, all of you? Take this all? Take this, all of you. You just don't know. And what happens when something that you have consecrated, not all of it has been consumed? How do you deal with that? Good question. All right, I'm going to move on. This is just fun stuff, and we could have fun all night, but I do want to, we can come back to any of this whenever you like. So we've got these three orders really of deacons, priests, and bishops, plus the laity, coming in the New Testament and happening in the first and second centuries, and then it becomes complicated. And those of you who are coming from a Roman Catholic tradition might recognize, not that anybody dresses like this anymore, but in the medieval church, you've got cardinals with these weird hats, and you've got, these other guys with funky stuff. That a lot of that's just medieval clothing, but it gets complicated. So as the church developed, it developed different roles for folks. And we read about this showing up in the historical record, and going from the bottom to the top on your left-hand side, or from the left to the right going up this picture, we have some of these roles that we find evidence of in the historical record. So if you look at the picture, on the left of the wall, you see this guy with the little patch on the back of his head, but looks like male pattern baldness. But they made sure that you actually did this. The tonsure that said, "I want to be interested in moving up through the serving in the church." And so he's on the one side of the door. But if you go on the other side of the door, you see somebody that's listed down at the bottom as porter. That's the doorkeeper. You move up all of these ways of being involved in leading worship. So the porter or the doorkeeper made sure that the non-Christians were kept outside of worship. Once they could be admitted to worship, then there was the lector, the person who read the lessons. Exorcist, we don't hear a lot about this. This isn't the movie with Linda Blair and all of those folks, but it was somebody who was sort of casting out demons. Then you get the people who are carrying the candles and the cross and the incense pot. And then somebody who's reading the New Testament lessons. And then between that guy who's 3 from your right, that says subdeacon, you get the deacon. And here we start to see sort of the New Testament orders. You've got the deacon, and then to his right, the priest. The bishop isn't listed there. So these are the ways that the church for a long time moved people from being just engaged as a layperson into roles of leadership in the church. Now the Episcopal Church just sees really 4 orders. That's being the layperson who has been baptized and who is enabled to read the lessons and pray the prayers and all of those kinds of things, to the deacon who has specific role in, as I've said a couple of times, representing the church to the world and the world to the church. There are roles in worship that are specific to the deacon. Nadine does some of these, but we enable lay people to do some of them. The deacon reads the gospel. The deacon helps set the table. The deacon dismisses the people, leads the confession. Lay people can do much of this, but when you have a deacon present, you let the deacon do these kinds of things. And then, of course, the priest, that would be me, pronounces absolution, celebrates the Eucharist, gives the blessing at the end of the service. Any one of these people can preach the sermon. That's not an ordained issue. When I was working towards being ordained, there were some people who were in the process who didn't see things quite the same way as I did. I'll just leave it at that. And I said, why are we ordaining people priests? Why does the church set people apart? The church does not set people apart to be teachers. Yeah, teaching is a great ministry, but we've got gifted teachers, and we should affirm their ministry, but that's different than ordaining somebody as a priest or a deacon. We've got people who can administer a $600,000 organization. That's Good Shepherd. We've got talented administrators and people like that's not what you ordain priests to do. We've got gifted counselors, and I know that there's at least one, maybe more on this Zoom call, right? People who've been trained to counsel, to listen, to heal in that way. That's not what you ordain people to do. You ordain people to bless water, to bless people who are penitent, to bless bread and wine. That's what we ordain clergy to do. And so all of these are ministries. We're just called to different things. We may have multiple gifts, and so the church ordains me to bless, but they employ me, you all employ me to oversee the congregation, to run the corporation, and all of that kind of stuff. Because the moments that I'm spent blessing things are probably like an hour a week, and that doesn't pay my salary, but running the congregation does. And teaching and all of those kinds of things are what y'all pay me to do. But what I do that nobody else can do, the church sets me apart to do, is to bless things. So this is how the church understands ministry, is that we all have various ministries, whether it's financial, whether it's teaching, whether it's counseling, whether it's administrative, or whether it's blessing. All of these are ministries of the church. Baptism says this is what God wants you to do. And then for some of us, as we talked about several weeks ago, we're called to specific ministries. Some of those we see every Sunday on Sunday, or every Sunday in worship. Others of those we see at different times throughout the week. So that's kind of the orders of the ministry. The Episcopal Church sees laity as a ministry by virtue of being baptized. The diaconate, or being a deacon, is an ordained ministry, a special ministry to which some people are called. The priesthood, another ministry to which some people are called. And the bishop, to which a smaller number of people are called, which was never what I wanted to be called to. So just to be clear. So all of that. Questions before we move on from here?
You have to be a deacon before you become a priest. Is that a step to the priesthood?
Historically, that became the answer to that became yes. Just like all of these people on this stair step going up, you went through the role of being a deacon. We've come to understand that a little differently in the last 15, 20, 25 years, is that some people are just called to be a deacon. That is their role. God called them to interpret the church to the world and the world to the church, to serve in a particular way that's different than lay people and different than the way that priests serve. We've come to understand that differently. But historically, if you wanted to be a priest, you went through that ordination as a deacon, and then you went through a subsequent ordination as a priest. I know that when I served my year as a deacon, that put me in contact with people in a different way than I have in terms of my contact with people now. They are different orders. They are different ways of expressing ministry in the world. So, yes, there are people who call to be, just sit down and have a conversation with the dean. And she is very firm, and rightfully so, that she is a deacon. She is not called to be a priest. And she would probably also tell you, and there are some arguments in the church being made right now, that people who are called to be priests should just be ordained to the priesthood. Forget the diaconal stepping over. It just goes straight from being a layperson who is called to be a priest to be a priest. There are good arguments either side of that. So that's a really good question, man. Thanks. Other questions? Okie dokie. So what's going on in I want to go back. So this is the way that most Episcopalians encounter the Episcopal Church, the Anglican Communion, is what's going on in the parish. And as I said earlier on, if when you look at the book goes at this the other direction. Book goes at this sort of top down. I go at this from sort of the bottom up, because I think most of us experience the church in the building on Sunday mornings. And who are those people that we see in front of the church, at the front of the church on Sunday mornings? And or in the congregation, we see the people sitting around us, lay folk for the most part. We see people like Deacon Nadine. You see people like me, and then you see bishops every so often. So these are the people we see. But then there are all of these folks. These are the bishops, right? All right. So these are the bishops of the Anglican communion, or of the Anglican Communion. And so mostly what I'm going to be talking about now is how the Anglican Communion, the Church of England, is structured and how we sort of experience it. So you'll remember back to all of the history that Henry VIII and all of that kind of stuff separated itself from Rome and established what at that point was called the Church of England. And then it expanded. The Church of England expanded through colonialism, primarily that way, through the expansion of the church going out in mission and then following colonialism. So those folks of us who trace that lineage back to the Church of England, we are all called Anglicans. And if you remember that weird little video in the very first week about what's the difference between an Episcopalian and an Anglican, this goes back to that. We trace our heritage back to the Reformation and how that spelled itself out in England. So those of us who call ourselves Anglican, Episcopalian, are those of us who trace our lineage back to the Church of England, or who are in communion with the Archbishop of Canterbury. And you may remember, I know this goes back several weeks. What does it mean to be in communion with? This is how the church is held together, is by who our lineage of bishops that go back all this way. So we in the Episcopal Church in the United States are in communion with the Archbishop of Canterbury. And we know that every decade or so, because the Archbishop of Canterbury will invite our bishops to come to a conference that is called the Lambeth Conference. I wrote down that and this is true, the last time the Lambeth Conference, the Lambeth Palace is where the Archbishop of Canterbury sort of lives. And so he or she, it's still a he, invites all of the bishops to a big conference at Lambeth. Last time this was held was in 2022. It's usually every 10 years. And we know the Episcopal Church in the United States, the Anglican Church of Canada, Australia, South India, all of these churches are in communion with the Archbishop of Canterbury. And so they all gather together. And when you get them all together, they look like this. from all over the place. And if you just look at that photo, how many white faces do you see? And how many non-white faces do you see? So the Anglican Communion is global. It's not just first world, clearly. It's global. And this, I forget when I adopted this picture, but if you look even closer, and I don't know if I can make this larger, probably not. Now, you will see that there are a number of women in that photo as well. 25, 30 years ago, the composition of the photo would have been very different. There may have been a lot of non-white first world faces, but there would have been no women. And so the Anglican Communion has grown, and the complexity of its composition has increased. So there are members who, I don't want to say of the communion, but there are heirs of the Church of England who are no longer in communion with the Archbishop of Canterbury. And that has happened within the last 30 or 40 years. They have said, yes, we recognize that you gave us birth, but we no longer want to affiliate with this family. And it's because of issues of sexuality, of women's ordination, and those kinds of things. So in the last 50 years, the U.S. church, the church in the United States, has came up with the Book of Common Prayer that you see in your pews, that red book, that was adopted in 1979. There were some members of the Episcopal Church, and I'm just going to stay there at this moment, who said, we don't like this new prayer book. We don't like this informal language or whatever. And they said, we are going to separate ourselves from you. And they became the Anglican Church of America. Okay. So there are some churches who look Episcopalian who are no longer part of the Episcopal Church. They have nothing to do with our presiding bishop. Our presiding bishop is in communion with the Archbishop of Canterbury. And so if you say we're not in communion with with our presiding bishop, that means that they're outside of the Anglican Communion. Subsequent to that, the Episcopal Church in the United States said, we're going to ordain women. Another group of people said, well, we don't care about your prayer book, but we're not going to ordain women. So they separated themselves from the Episcopal Church at that point. And then as time went on, the Episcopal Church said, we're going to ordain gay, lesbian people. And another group of churches around the world said, we are no longer in communion with you. And the language that is referred to there is GAFCON, the Global Anglican Fellowship of, I can't remember what the CON stands for. A lot of these churches are, national churches in Africa, in Asia, places like that, where, trying to think about the best way to put this, is, where the progressive ways of the industrialized West are at odds with places that aren't industrialized West, right? So Africa, Asia, some parts of the southern cone of America. So and these churches who have separated themselves from from the Episcopal Church, but other parts of the Anglican Communion aren't still in communion with the Archbishop and of Canterbury. And that has been the way that for centuries we talked about the Anglican Communion. And that has become fractured in the last 50, 60, 70 years over issues of language, gender, and sexuality. And we see that around us in a number of different ways. In a mile of my house, I drive by it many times a week. There is a church that is called Resurrection Anglican Fellowship. And it is a church that grew out of the Episcopal Church in the United States, but because of issues of sexuality, ordination of women, of things like that, says we're no longer part of you, but they trace their heritage back to the English Reformation. I've never been in that building. I don't know the priest who is part of that building. Their theology in terms of the Trinity and all of that kind of stuff is exactly the same as ours. They understand how the church deals in the world differently than we do. And this is part of the sorrow of experience of the church in the world and ways that we've talked about as a larger church for centuries. So I'm going to stop there for a second and ask for real quick questions, then I'm going to move on.
These other groups have their, go ahead. Go
Oh,
ahead.
sorry, Nan. Sure. I was just curious, just quickly, are the majority of Episcopal, or I guess Episcopal/Anglican, if some of them call themselves Anglican in the US, are most of them in communion? And also, how do you tell the difference? Is it whether or not they have like the shield, like the
Yep.
famous sign?
Oh,
That's the difference. Is it
what a fabulous question. So in the United States, if you wanted to look at a sign on a church or on a website, if it said Episcopal, that would say, yes, we are clearly in a part of the Episcopal Church, and therefore we are clearly part of the larger Anglican communion. If I drive down the church and I see Resurrection Anglican Fellowship, they're tracing their heritage to the Church of England back in the 16th century, but they probably aren't in communion with the Episcopal Church. So I'm going to give you some numbers. If you look on this church, where it's on this slide, where it says the 1979 prayer book, there were churches who said, we don't want the new prayer book. Those are the Anglican churches of America. There are probably only 5,000 of those people left in the United States. The next group, where they said, we're not going to ordain women, that's the Anglican Catholic Church. There's one of those on Iliff, as you head from the freeway to west on Iliff, right before you get to University Boulevard. There's St. Mary's Anglican Catholic Church. There are probably about 35,000 of those in the United States. The Anglican Church of North America, that's the one that's down the street from me. There are probably 120,000 of those in the United States. Everything else, with the exception of those that are beyond our borders, everything else, the million plus in the United States are Episcopal Church. Does that help?
Do they have?
Sorry, I couldn't unmute. Yes, that does. That exactly answers it. Thank you.
Okay, good. Yeah, Nan.
Do they have a structure similar to ours, their own regions and bishops or whatever, or are they independents?
Say again. You were coughing and breaking up a little bit.
Yeah. Do they have a structure similar to ours
Yes.
with regions and bishops and all the rest?
Yes, they do. It's just that because their numbers are smaller, the regions are larger.
Yeah.
So, yeah, good question. So in the Anglican Communion, you can see this slide is old, but you can see that the Anglican Communion is in general, is made up of all of these people. So we've got like I say, the slide is old, 2.3 million Episcopalians. You got 2 million Episcopalians in Southern Africa, 17.5 million Anglicans in Nigeria.
Wow.
And in Britain, because everybody who's born in Britain is theoretically born into the Church of England. So that 13.4 million folks in Britain is grossly exaggerated. Same thing in Australia, 3.8 million, grossly exaggerated. We count people who go to who worship. Canada probably does too. But so how do you count? But the numbers that you see there, even though this is an old slide, are representative of the proportions of people who trace their lineage to the Church of England. And this has become a huge debating point in the last 20 years. Why are we owing allegiance to the Archbishop of Canterbury? This strange historical artifact, who is sort of a titular head to this global grouping of folks. And it's a huge debate. It's mirrored in the Roman Catholic Church, especially if you think about many of the First Nations or the Western Church, who are out of sync with a lot of the rest of global Catholicism. So what happens when you've got a church that was localized in one place and then grows? And the Episcopal Church is one of those bodies, as is the Roman Catholic Church. The Methodists are experiencing similar issues and are splitting along the lines of sexuality and things like that right now as we speak. So, what does it mean to be a member of a global church? We're struggling with that. But in the United States, and I'm just going to talk about the Episcopal Church right now, which is sort of a little bit larger than the United States. We still sort of say that we are associated or affiliated with our presiding bishop. The new one is Sean, our presiding bishop. It used to be Michael, our presiding bishop. But in the Episcopal Church, we are divided up for basically mission-oriented purposes, into provinces. And you can see that we have nine provinces. We are in Colorado. We are in Province 6. I spent many years in Province 8, some years in Province 4. Like I said, we group together for purposes of sort of common mission. So in Province 6, we recognize that for the most part, we are east of the Continental Divide. We are north of that sort of mid-continental divide, east-west mid-continental divide. And so the province meets as a province occasionally. But now the church has grown since this, you can see down at the bottom of the slide, 1998, we are now, quite a ways different than that. But we have now the Diocese of Cuba, which is part of Province 9. We have other things. So this is how we are organized nationally, sub-organized. But then we are even sub-organized. Oh, shoot. go back. So all of these groupings, whether they're dioceses, and you can see that there are, look over on your left, you can see California, the state, has a number of different dioceses, 6 different dioceses in California, 2 in Oregon, 2 in Washington, but only 1 in Colorado. And then there are some places where there are multiple states that are combined into one diocese. So it's a complex way of governing, organizing the church for mission. And I would say that that's how we group together this complex thing that is the Episcopal Church. Well, the Episcopal Church as a whole gets together every 3 years to sort of govern itself. How are we going to engage in mission? How are we going to understand our role in the world? Are we going to say that we are going to ordain women or not? The Episcopal Church made that decision. And we decided as a church that we were going to ordain women long before South India or South Africa or Australia or New Zealand or Canada. We decided we were going to do this as the Episcopal Church. So we as a national church or as an organizational body make decisions on our own. We do this because we gather together every 3 years. COVID interrupted that a bit, but every 3 years, and we make this decision. We have a presiding bishop. This is not an archbishop, a presiding bishop, who is sort of the first among equals. And what I say is he or she has the power of the gavel. I call this meeting to order. And they have, but other than that, they don't have authority. For us, our presiding bishop doesn't have authority. In other churches, part of the Anglican Communion, the archbishop might have authority, not theological authority, but administrative or bureaucratic authority. For us, the presiding bishop has sort of bureaucratic authority, but not ultimate authority. So in Colorado, we make our decisions. Utah makes its decisions. Nebraska makes its decisions. New York's Diocese of New York, Diocese of California, Diocese of Texas, all make their decisions for their diocese under the umbrella of the Episcopal Church. So what that means in structure is that the American church, the Episcopal Church in the United States, makes a set of decisions, and I'm going to race through this really quickly in these next several slides. And that sets the undergirding structure. Each individual diocese can make decisions. They can't countermand the decision of the national church, but they can live on top of them. So we can do things over and above what the national church says, but we can't countermand. If the national church says you cannot ordain women, the Diocese of Colorado says, well, we're going to do that anyway. Okay? So if the national church says A, we can do A.1, but we can't do B. So that's sort of a structural issue. So, and like I say, I'm going to have to rush through some of this, and your questions have been great, and that is sort of necessitated. So there's this big structure. There's the General Convention, which really makes the decisions for the church. Our General Convention meets every 3 years. It makes the decisions for the church. And then it has leadership. It has the presiding bishop, like I say, who has the power of the gavel. And then you can see all of these other bodies and these individuals. What a strange organizational chart. If you were to put this against whoever you worked for and to say, does this look like anything like your organizational chart? You would say, this is really weird. But it is the way that the Episcopal Church grew. We are now a body that looks, and our founding fathers, using that word loosely, were many of the same founding fathers of the United States. So we have a bicameral organization. We have bishops, the House of Bishops and the House of Deputies, like we got the Senate and we got the House of Representatives. We've got somebody at the top, and then we've got all of these local bodies and how do all of these structures. So there's a very pyramidal structure to the Episcopal Church, just like there is to the structure of our U.S. government. And then folks that help make the decisions in between. So, whether the U.S. makes decisions, through ratifying amendments and all those kinds of things, so does the church get together and make those decisions in terms of what's going to affect the entire church. There's a very parallel situation structurally. Maybe not in the way that it spells itself out, but structurally, that's the way it's sort of set up. Then it comes down to the diocesan level. And so here on your right, you see a picture of our current bishop, Kim Lucas. That's a photo that probably her husband took of her when she got the phone call saying she had been elected to be the bishop of the Diocese of Colorado. In the Episcopal Church, bishops of dioceses, of these local judicatories, are elected by the clergy and by the laity. The book pointed this out clearly, that the election has to be a majority of both the clergy and the laity. The laity can't choose a bishop, the clergy can't choose a bishop. It has to be joint. And it's not just a majority of everybody, it has to be joint. And so Kim was elected bishop, and some of the, there were people in our congregation who wanted her from the very outset. A lot of the clergy had to be pulled into saying, yes, this is who we want. I voted for her at the very beginning. So, but it's a joint thing to say, this is who we want to lead us as a diocese. The Diocese of Colorado is the state of Colorado. In the state of California, there are numerous dioceses because the population is so large and the geography is so large. But in Colorado, given the number of people who are Episcopalian in the state, we are divided up into regions. We, Good Shepherd, are part of the High Plains region, that pinkish magenta-ish thing on the right hand portion of your screen. There's a church just down the street from us, down Dry Creek, that is in that sort of bluish greenish thing called the Front Range. And that's because they're on the other side of the Platte River. So how do you divide up things? You use geography, use other things. But, even though St. Gregory's in Littleton has a Littleton address, St. Timothy's Episcopal Church down the street, which is in some respects geographically closer to St. Gregory's, is in the same region that we are. St. Gregory's is in a different region. But this is how we've divided ourselves up. Again, sort of engage in common mission and things like that. So as a diocese, every diocese does this in one way or another, divides itself up into sub-regions for purposes of common mission. So we are in the High Plains region of the church. And if you want to know more about that, talk to Jim Wolfe. He will tell you more than you want to know about all the regions because he is a passionate representative of the High Plains region. Boiling it down, we are a congregation within the region, the High Plains region. We are a parish. We are a self-sufficient, financially organization, a congregation within this diocese, which means that as the rector, I am, as the book pointed out, I am the ruler of the congregation. Rector, as one old priest said, rector derives from Latin rex, which means king. So that's my role. I'm the chief executive officer of the corporation that is Good Shepherd Episcopal Church. Other congregations are not financially self-sufficient, and so therefore are called missions. And so the person who sits in my chair is usually called the vicar, who stands in the stead of the bishop. They are there serving for the bishop or for a larger congregation. Good Shepherd was a mission church at its beginning of St. Timothy's, which at that time was located in the city of Littleton. So we have a unique, I don't want to say unique, but sort of singular role in that we were a mission of another parish that then became its own parish. We weren't a mission planted by the diocese. We've got some of those that are extant in Colorado. We were a mission of another congregation. So a vicar leads a mission, a rector leads a parish. The governing board of a parish is the vestry. Nan, who's on this call, was a member of the vestry. If the same body in a mission is called the bishop's committee. So the structure is similar. It's just that the language is, or the descriptions are a little bit different.
Gary, then a
jump
mission
in.
church, a mission church is like a starter church. Is that what it just means? It's just a starter church until they become self-supporting?
It could be, or yeah, for the most, in general, that's a good description. Sometimes a mission will be a place where there's no expectation that it will ever be a parish. So, for example, a good example of this was when I was in California, Diocese of California, based in San Francisco. We had a mission that was to the, they were called the seafarers. So it's a port city, right? And so you got ships coming in all of the time. And people going in and out and in and out. We're talking about merchant marines and cargo vessels. And so we had a mission that was to the port. It would never be a parish. It would never be self-sufficient. But the diocese said, we need to have a presence in this place. And so it was a mission that was fully funded by the diocese to deal with a place that would never be a mission, because these people didn't live there. They lived on board, and they came in and went out. So, so I think for most of us, we think of a mission as being a starter, but in other places, it's never going to be a parish because it's not geographically local, it's not self-sustaining, but it's important for the church to be engaged. Okay, makes sense?
Okay, yeah, that does. Thank you.
Yeah, sure. So I'm having too much fun or we're having too much fun. So how are we organized? We have a Book of Common Prayer um, that governs how we worship. We've got rubrics that tell me how worship is done on every Sunday or on coming up day after tomorrow on Ash Wednesday. There are instructions in the book. They're usually in italics. They're called rubrics because in the old day they were printed in red, Latin for red, ruber. Um, and there's a distinction in terms of how we worship between things that you can do or the things that you have to do. And those are may rubrics. You may say this, you don't have to, as opposed to you shall do this, you have to do this. And if you pick up a Book of Common Prayer next time you're in church, you follow through the worship there as opposed to in the bulletin, you can see all of the italicized stuff. And you can see where it says shall or may. So the Book of Common Prayer directs our weekly regular worship. And in there, you will see the outline of the faith. We talked about that a little bit more, sort of what we assert that we believe as Anglicans, as Episcopalians. Then we have kind of the real rule book of the church, how we run ourselves organizationally. And we call this our Constitution and Canons. This is a book you can find online. It talks about all of the organization. It talks about who's at the top. We've got to have a chief financial officer. This puts the church in conversation with sort of corporate stuff, but it also talks about how do we worship? What are the rules or categories? Not categories, wrong word. Qualifications, that was the word I was looking for who can lead worship. What kind of training did I have to go through? All of that kind of stuff. That's the issue of ministry. What happens when somebody messes up? If there is a priest who's been ordained or a bishop who dips their hand into the till and starts extorting funds, or if somebody messes up with inappropriate relationships with people in the congregation or other kinds of things, how do we deal with discipline? What's our internal law? Sure, if a bishop or a priest or a deacon is found to be legally doing something illegal by civil law, what does the church do with them because they've been ordained? So just because you've been convicted of a crime, does that mean that you should be no longer a priest or a deacon or a bishop? So we have this a whole section of our Constitution and canons that has to do with discipline, ecclesiastical discipline. And those show up, I don't want to say all the time, but unfortunately, often enough that we have to decide that. And so is it a matter of saying you are no longer a priest or a deacon or a priest in this church? We revoke your orders because you've abused power or you've abused, what you can do. Or do we say, well, you can remain a priest or a deacon or a bishop, but you cannot function in a particular role? So I'm going to use an example. How many of you remember or have seen the book about, I can't, the title just slipped from my mind, about jobs in your parachute? The language of parachute and employment, I wish I could remember. Anyway, so there was a wonderful book that came out decades ago that had to do with my job is my parachute, or, and it was written by an Episcopal priest. It's a very famous book. Well, he'd been married 3 times and wanted to get married again. Well, the whole order issue of multiple marriages and being a priest in the church began to be really, really problematic as a mission, as a presence of ministry, as all of that kind of stuff. And he went to his bishop. It was I won't go there. And the bishop said, renounce your orders. I am not going to allow you to be married under the church for a 4th time. This is just sort of beyond the pale. Yes, 1 marriage, maybe 2, but 4, and so this is way beyond the pale. You either renounce your orders or don't look to the church to have the church bless your marriage. And so the priest at that point said, okay, take me out of the orders. I renounce my orders. So, so this is ecclesiastical discipline at work. And I never met this priest. I know his book. I used the book. I was in that diocese. I never met him. And so I understand all of this. How does this work? So what's the ministry of the church? What's the mission of the church? How do we make that flow? And then, of course, there's rules of order. There are those of us who are firm on Robert's Rules of Order. Need a first, a motion and a second, discussion, vote, abstention, all of that kind of thing. The church runs in this way. We understand the church running through the Holy Spirit in this way of making decisions. And the church has made decisions for decades, centuries, millennia, maybe not with Robert's Rules of Order, but in terms of a certain ways of growth. So that's how we tend to run ourselves. Oh my goodness. And now in the last 4 minutes, we're going to talk about the mission of the church, except that I think we've talked about the mission of the church for the last number of weeks. The mission of the church is to restore all people to unity with God and with each other. And this is where the rubber really meets the road, is how do we do this? What is the mission of the church? And we have been debating this forever. Is it to mean that we make sure that everybody has some sort of confession of faith? Or do we mean that we want people to have whole lives? Do we want people to feel that they are loved by God? What does the mission of the church mean? And the book did a pretty good description of that, saying, well, sometimes that means that we establish schools, we establish hospitals, we do these kinds of things. And that's one really wonderful expression of what missionary activity is. Another example is going out and to establish new churches, new congregations. What does that mean in different places? In a place like Colorado, we've got a new mission that is being established down in south of Littleton, in Sterling Ranch. Here's a place where people are moving. Is there a mission field in Sterling Ranch? Is it establish a congregation in Sterling Ranch down there sort of south of Chatfield Reservoir? That's a mission field. That's different than putting in a hospital or a school or something like that. So it's a challenge. Is mission for the church going? When I was interviewed at Good Shepherd, she's no longer at this congregation. They moved out of state, and she said, well, in my interview, she said, we're expecting a huge influx in Centennial of retired people. And what does mission look like to them? Because we're expecting the retired population in Centennial to grow by 1.2% in the next 10 years? I said, that's a really good question. But we have within a mile radius of Good Shepherd, we have 4 elementary schools. That's 1,200 families. So where do we focus our mission? Is it to a suspected influx of retired people, or is it to our families, these people who are going to come in, that we can recognize all of these families in all of these, where is our mission? It isn't one or the other, but how do we understand how we present, how we take out the gospel into our community? So is it what Good Shepherd is doing? Is it what is going on in the community is at large? What does it mean to proclaim by word and example the good news of God in Christ? What does it mean to seek and serve Christ in all persons? If we have immigrants moving in who may barely speak English or have no connection with Christianity, what difference, what does that mean to proclaim by word and example to them? What does justice and peace among all people mean in this changing context of immigration, of migration, of changing political landscapes? What does that mean? What does it mean to cherish the wondrous works of God? These are our baptismal promises. What does it mean to bring these to bear in the world? This is all of our mission. Mission isn't something that happened. Mission is something that we engage in every day with every individual in which we, with whom we have contact, whether it's online, whether it's at the coffee shop, grocery store, school, workplace, all of those kinds of things. What does this mean? And it's bigger than just putting up a sign. As much as I like to see our sign, the Episcopal Church welcomes you. What does it mean to translate that into discipleship, into further mission, and all of those kinds of things? So this is the mission of the church. I've got one last slide. And so before I get to that slide, I want to see if there are responses, questions, reactions to this very last piece that I've had to rush really quickly through. Oh, nobody has unmuted themselves. No longer have to raise a hand. We just watch for people unmuting. So. All right. So the last thing is, what's next? And this is really sort of structural, and I don't expect you to raise your hand on any of these. But first, I want to say thank you for being here over the last, 6 weeks and engaging in these conversations, doing the reading. I've been able to see heads go up and down, whether you've, with that one exception of that one week when I couldn't see everybody, your engagement, your questions, whether they've been here or they've been in person on Sunday mornings. Thank you for that. Thank you for interest, engagement, wanting to learn, wanting to enrich your understanding of who the church is. Regardless of any next steps, you have given yourself and us at Good Shepherd and the Episcopal Church a great gift. So thank you. If you want to take some further steps, I'm going to talk about that for the next few minutes. But let me preface that by saying your involvement at Good Shepherd, your membership at Good Shepherd, receiving emails, all of that is absolutely unconnected with what comes next. You are there, and we are so grateful for that participation and attendance. What comes next is a possibility for you. There is no, I have no expectation other than, what you want to do. So all of this is saying if you want to say, I believe in the Episcopal Church, I believe in what's going on, I want to identify that with that, then these are options. So if you have been baptized in a church that is not already in communion with the Episcopal Church. So if you come from a Methodist, Presbyterian, some other church that is not in communion with the Episcopal Church, then confirmation is an option. We can talk, and we can talk about this individually if I'm going to confuse things. If you have been a member of the Lutheran Church or the Orthodox or the Roman Catholic Church and want to say, I really feel that my way of relating to God and Christ and the church is through the Episcopal Church, then being received into the Episcopal Church is the right option. If you are a lifelong Episcopalian or an Episcopalian of years, and you say, I really get it now, and I want to stand in front of the bishop and say, I reaffirm everything that was said on my behalf, or even that I said when I was confirmed. I understand it differently now. Then this is an option called reaffirmation of baptismal vows. So if you were Roman Catholic, Orthodox, Lutheran, and want to say, I want to become sort of Episcopalian, you would be received. If you were Methodist, Baptist, United Church of Christ, Pentecostal, and say, and you have been baptized, I want to come into the Episcopal Church, you would be confirmed. If you're already Episcopalian, say, I want to do more of that, you would reaffirm your baptismal vows. Now, I'm not asking for a raise of hand of anybody. This would be really a conversation with me. But these are sort of your options going ahead. You don't have to do any of this. You are welcome at Good Shepherd, welcome to come up and take communion, all of those kinds of things. I would only sort of add to that to say, if you haven't been baptized, then this would be an opportunity to be baptized. And then we can talk about how that would happen and then be confirmed as well. The next time we would do baptism at Good Shepherd would be at Easter. Confirmation, all of these other things that are listed in red on the slide, those would happen on the 20th of May at St. John's Cathedral downtown. That's done by the bishop. I can do baptism. This is where these orders sort of spell out in different ways. So I'm going to say that, and then I'm going to ask for questions because it's always so confusing. And I've gotten enough emails to know how confusing this is. If you don't want to raise these in front of the rest of this crowd, that's fine. If you just want to talk to me, that's fine. But I'm going to stop the slide share and bring us all back into one Zoom room and see if there are, oops, and I froze. See if there we go, questions about any of that or any of the other stuff that we've talked about this evening. Please unmute yourselves and let me know what I can answer if I can.
I just wanted to say thank you, Gary. I feel like I've taken a college course in church history, and I just feel so much more knowledgeable. And yeah, I really appreciate being invited to this class. The timeliness of us joining or coming to Good Shepherd was amazing. So thank you.
You're welcome. Yeah,
I just echo that. Thank you so much.
There is so much. I just did a Sunday morning class on Nicaea at 1700, and I was thinking before tonight that a number of things that we were going to talk about tonight were part of that class. I've taught classes on the sacraments. I've taught classes on all of this stuff. But you're right, Tammy, that there's so much that's here, and I've been doing this for decades, right? And I love this stuff. I think that what we know, the more that we know, the more that we understand, just increases our ability to to relate to God, to relate to the way that God deals with us in this amazing sort of creation, and in the mix of our dealings with people in the world that we don't often have a chance to sort of delve into. And so I'm so grateful for y'all's dedication to being here and working with this. So yeah, it's a privilege for me. This is one of the things that I really enjoy doing every spring. And I encourage you to ask me more questions, look back, and if you want to know more about some of the things that I say that I've talked about, I can point you back to old YouTubes because they're all on our website, and sort of work your way through some of the others of those in more or less depth. But yeah, so thank you, Tammy. Other questions? Recognizing that we're
Thank you. I learned a lot. Just want to ditto what she had said, just there's a lot that I thought I knew and I didn't know it at all.
I learn something new every time. That's why one loves to be a teacher, is because you continue to learn.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Okay.
Any other questions?
Thank you again, Gary.
Sure. You all take a close look at each other, and the next time you're in church, look for each other. Maybe you have already, but do that. And of course, tomorrow night, pancake supper. Great time outside of formal kind of stuff to get together and shovel
See
sausage.
where this blizzard's going first. I keep hearing about this blizzard coming when we go to sleep. So,
I'm going to say it depends on which weather channel you on. One.
I know. I know. I heard 3 different things today.
The leader of the men's group emailed me and said, "How are we going to make a decision about tomorrow night?" And I said, and I sent 2 screenshots of 2 different weather things, and I said, "Looks like it's going to rain." We live in Colorado, for crying out loud. But if we have to make the call, we'll make the call, and y'all are adults. You can make your own call. But I'll probably be at the church, not because I'm employed, but because I'll make the, it's just, I can deal with weather, so, but that's me. Anyway, you all have been great. Thank you so much.
Ryan is cooking pancakes tomorrow, by the way.
I'm coming to eat.
So I'll see you there. I used to cook pancakes. Now I just show up. Leave that to the young people.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Gary.
Thanks. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Lisa, I sent you a message with my email address in it.
What was that, Nan?
So Lisa, I sent her an email or a message on this in the chat with my email address in it. You were asking for my email address.
Okay. All right. We'll
Lisa was asking for my email address. Look
I don't understand what
at
that
the bottom, you'll have a thing that says chat.
Yeah.
Yeah, click on it. It's got my email address in it.
Oh, okay.
For some reason, your phone number didn't say, so I couldn't send it to you.
I have your email. I have it in my room.
Okay, you do have it now. Okay.
Yes, I do. But
right.
thank you for sending it again.
Okay. Yeah.
All right.
Bye bye. Thank you for everything. Each time I get involved with any of you, I feel deeper connected, more deeply connected.
I look forward to seeing some of you and everybody around.
That's the goal.
It's been fun to go through it again. I learned a lot I didn't know the first time. So
Good. That's the goal. Good night, y'all.
Yeah. Bye, guys.